The black Mercedes sat idling outside the Accra Polo Club at 11:40 at night, its engine running low and patient the way expensive engines run, as though the car itself had been trained in the etiquette of waiting without complaint. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and drop a like. We are pushing toward 5,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins this family is part of why these stories get told. Now let us go back to the car and to the man sitting behind its wheel in the dark. His name was Isaac Boateng Asare. He was 57 years old, and he had been a professional driver for 31 of those years. Not the kind of driver who considered the work a temporary condition between better things, but the kind who had long ago made his peace with what he was and had found in that peace a dignity that no one could revise for him regardless of how they spoke to him or what assumptions they carried into the back seat. He was a compact man, neither tall nor short, with a face that had been weathered by years of early mornings and late nights and the particular patience that the driving profession required, a face that had learned to remain neutral in the presence of other people's dramas because other people's dramas were, in his profession, a constant and unavoidable condition of the work. He wore his usual uniform, dark trousers, a white shirt, black shoes that he polished every morning, not because anyone required it, but because his father had polished his shoes every morning and had told him once that a man who respected his shoes respected himself, which was the kind of thing that sounds simple until you understand what it means. He had been driving for the Abrokwa family for 11 years. Specifically, he had been the personal driver of Mr. Theodore Abrokwa, who was 68 years old and was one of the most significant property and hospitality figures in Accra. A man who had built his empire over 40 years with the methodical, unflashy accumulation of someone who understood that lasting wealth was built quietly and maintained carefully. Mr. Theodore, as Isaac called him, as everyone in the household called him, because he had established early in his career a preference for the simplicity of his first name over the performance of his title, was a man Isaac respected in the specific way that drivers respected good employers, which was not the admiration of a subordinate for a superior, but the appreciation of someone who had been treated with consistent decency across 11 years and who understood the value of that consistency, because he had worked for people who did not provide it. Mr. Theodore was inside the Polo Club at this hour for the monthly dinner of a business association he had belonged to for 20 years, and Isaac was outside in the Mercedes, doing what he always did while he waited, not sleeping, not on his phone, but simply present, alert, aware of his surroundings in the way that good drivers were aware, a background attention that registered everything without being agitated by anything. The Polo Club's main entrance was to his left. The side entrance, which opened into the car park, was to his right. It was from the side entrance that the voice came. Isaac did not see who came through first. He heard the door, the particular push-bar sound of a heavy external door being opened, and then voices, and the voices were not the voices of men leaving a pleasant dinner, but the voices of men continuing a conversation that had been going on for some time, and that had the specific intensity of a discussion that its participants would not have wanted to have inside. Isaac did not move. He did not turn his head. He had learned in 31 years of professional driving that the back seat and the surrounding vicinity of a car was a space that powerful people treated as private, as though the car itself created an enclosure of confidentiality that the driver inside it did not penetrate, as though drivers were a category of furniture rather than a category of person. He had received this treatment without bitterness, because bitterness was expensive, and because, over the years, it had occasionally provided him with information that turned out to matter. The two men stopped perhaps 4 meters from the rear of the Mercedes, in the shadow between 2 parked cars. Isaac could see them in his side mirror, 2 men, standing close, one of them gesturing with the precision of someone making an argument rather than a conversation. He recognized one of them immediately. It was Mr. Clarence Abrokwa. He was 59 years old, the younger brother of Mr. Theodore by 9 years, and he occupied a position in the Abrokwa business structure that had been a source of private, carefully unspoken tension in the household for as long as Isaac had worked there. Mr. Clarence was a man of considerable surface, well-dressed always, well-spoken always, with the kind of social ease that made him the most comfortable person in most rooms he entered. He had a role in the family company as a non-executive director, which meant in practice that he attended board meetings and held a title and received a director's fee and had the Abrokwa name on his business card without having built any of the thing the name was attached to. Isaac had driven him on perhaps 30 occasions over 11 years when Mr. Theodore had asked him to collect his brother from the airport or take him to an appointment. He had always been pleasant in the back seat, generous with tips. The kind of pleasant that Isaac had learned over 31 years to receive with appreciation and without trust, because pleasantness in powerful people was not always the same as goodness, and the difference between the two was usually revealed not in the pleasant moments but in the other ones. The second man Isaac did not recognize. He was younger, perhaps 40, lean, with the restless, calculating energy of someone whose primary skill was the identification of opportunities that other people had not yet noticed. He was speaking now, leaning slightly toward Mr. Clarence, his voice low but carrying in the night air with the clarity that Accra nights gave to outdoor sound. "The assessor has confirmed the valuation," the second man said. "The estate and the contents together. It is the figure we discussed. The policy pays out in full on total loss." Isaac's hands rested on the steering wheel. He did not move them. He breathed quietly. Mr. Clarence said, "And it would read as electrical. The old wiring. The old wiring in the East Wing has been documented in 3 maintenance reports over 6 years. It is the most credible possible cause. Nobody looks further than a credible cause." "Theodore is in Kumasi next Thursday," Mr. Clarence said. "He confirmed it yesterday." "The Kumasi site visit. He will be there 2 days minimum." "Thursday night," the second man said. "The staff have Thursdays off from 8. The watchman is the only one on site after 9, and the watchman—" He paused, and something in the pause had a quality that Isaac did not like, a quality of a problem being referred to obliquely rather than stated directly. "The watchman has been managed," Mr. Clarence said. His voice was flat in the way of a man who has passed a point where certain details required emotional acknowledgement. Isaac sat in the front seat of the black Mercedes in the car park of the Accra Polo Club and felt the night air from the slightly open window on his face and heard what he was hearing and understood with the complete cold clarity of a man whose mind had been sharpened by 31 years of paying attention in the vicinity of other people's lives, exactly what he was hearing. The estate. Mr. Theodore's estate on the Tresaco Valley Road, the property that the old man had built over 20 years, the one with the gardens and the main house, and the guest wing and the east wing that contained, among other things, the archive room where 40 years of business records were kept, and the private gallery where Mr. Theodore had collected Ghanaian art across 3 decades, pieces that Isaac had transported on many occasions wrapped in cloth in the back of the car, each one handled by the old man with the specific reverence of someone who understood that what he was holding was not decoration, but history. Total loss. Isaac thought about the watchman comment. He thought about the particular flatness of Mr. Clarence's voice when he had said the watchman has been managed. He thought about a man alone on an estate on a Thursday night, managed. He thought about 40 years of art and records and the work of a man who had built something real, burning. He thought about Mr. Theodore sitting in the polo club 30 meters away, eating his dinner with his association, knowing none of this. The 2 men moved away from the car, walking toward the far end of the car park, their voices dropping below what Isaac could hear. He watched them in the mirror until they turned a corner and were gone. Then he sat for a long moment in the idling Mercedes, with his hands on the steering wheel and the engine running its patient, expensive patience, and the night air on his face, and thought about what a driver did when he heard what a driver was not supposed to hear. He thought about his position. He thought about the 11 years. He thought about Mr. Theodore's consistent, unflashy decency across those 11 years. The Christmas envelope that was always generous and always given personally. The way he said "Good morning, Isaac" every morning, as though the words meant something rather than as a verbal reflex. The day 3 years ago when Isaac's wife Abina had been in hospital and Mr. Theodore had sent the company doctor without being asked and had told Isaac to take whatever time he needed and had not mentioned it again. He thought about a man who deserved to know what was being planned in the car park of his club while he finished his dinner. Then Isaac Boateng reached into the glove compartment and took out the small notebook he kept there, the one in which he noted mileage and fuel and maintenance, the unremarkable record of a driver's working life. And he opened it to a clean page and he wrote down, in his careful, deliberate handwriting, the date, the time, every word he had heard, and the name of the man who had said them. He wrote it all down before a single word could soften in his memory. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the glove compartment and sat up straight in his seat and waited for Mr. Theodore to come through the Polo Club's main entrance, which was what he was paid to do, and which tonight was the most important thing he had ever been paid to do. Mr. Theodore Abrokwa came through the Polo Club's main entrance at 12:25, which was later than his usual departure time from these dinners. He was typically at the door by midnight because he was a man who understood that the value of sleep was not negotiable regardless of what the evening offered as an alternative. He came out with two other men, all three of them in the particular unhurried conversation of people who have been talking for 3 hours and have reached the comfortable winding down stage where the important things have been said, and what remains is the pleasure of each other's company without agenda. Isaac saw him through the windscreen and got out of the car and opened the rear door and stood beside it in the way he had stood beside it 11,000 times across 11 years. Straight, present, unhurried, the door held at exactly the right angle. Mr. Theodore said goodnight to his companions and walked to the car and paused before getting in, which he sometimes did, to look at the sky, which was his habit on clear nights. He had told Isaac once, years ago, that his father had taught him to look at the sky at night as a form of gratitude, and that he had never stopped doing it, which Isaac had noted and had never forgotten, because it was the kind of detail that told you who a person actually was when the business cards were put away. Tonight, the sky was clear and very full. Mr. Theodore looked at it for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he got in. Isaac closed the door. He went around to the driver's side and got in and sat and looked at the road ahead and felt the specific weight of what was sitting in the glove compartment beside his left knee. He started the engine. He pulled out of the car park and onto the road and drove in the direction of Mr. Theodore's residence on the airport residential road where the old man spent his weeknights, the estate being his weekend and occasion property. The car was quiet. Mr. Theodore was looking at his phone, scrolling with the thumb of a man reviewing the end-of-day accumulation, and Isaac drove and thought. He had been thinking since the two men had walked away into the far end of the car park. He had been thinking through the problem from every angle that 31 years of careful, observant, professional life had equipped him to think from, and the thinking kept arriving at the same place, which was that what he had heard could not be carried alone past tonight, and that the person it needed to be carried to was the man in the back seat of this car. The question was not whether to tell him. That question had resolved itself in the car park while he was still writing in his notebook. The question was how. How a driver of 11 years told his employer that the employer's brother was planning to burn his estate to the ground for insurance money, while a watchman who had been managed was alone on the property. He thought about the hierarchy of the situation. He thought about his position in it, a driver, a staff member, a man whose access to this information was itself irregular, obtained through the specific invisibility that his role afforded him, an invisibility that was useful tonight in a way that it had never been useful before. He thought about Mr. Theodore's face. He had spent 11 years reading that face in the rearview mirror, not intrusively, not with the prurience of a man interested in other people's private expressions, but with the professional attention of a driver who understood that knowing his employer's mood was part of knowing how to do his job well. He knew what Mr. Theodore looked like when he was tired, and when he was preoccupied, and when he was at peace, and when something was troubling him. He knew what the old man's face did when he received bad news and when he was making a difficult decision. He had never in 11 years been the person delivering the bad news. "Sir," Isaac said. He said it at a red light on the Independence Avenue stretch, which gave them a natural pause in the motion of the journey, a moment of stillness that the conversation required. In the rearview mirror, he saw Mr. Theodore lower his phone. He saw the old man's face shift from the abstracted attention of someone reading a screen to the present, direct attention of someone who had registered that his driver had spoken, which was not a common occurrence on late-night returns, and which therefore carried, by its rarity, a signal. "Isaac," Mr. Theodore said. His voice was neutral, but alert. "I need to tell you something," Isaac said. "Something I heard tonight, in the car park." A pause. The light was still red. "Tell me," Mr. Theodore said. Isaac told him. He told him the way he had been rehearsing it since the car park, precisely, chronologically, in the order the words had arrived, without interpretation beyond what was factually necessary. He reported it the way he had written it in the notebook. The time, the two men, the words he had heard, the specific phrases, the Thursday, the East Wing, the old wiring, the insurance, the watchman. He said, "Mr." Clarence's name clearly and without hesitation, because there was no version of this conversation in which that name could be omitted without dishonoring the truth of what he had heard. He said it all in the same even, careful voice he used for everything, directions, traffic reports, arrival times, because this information deserved the same steadiness that all information deserved from him, and because he understood that the way he delivered this would determine whether it was received as what it was or distorted by the emotion of its delivery into something easier to doubt. When he finished, the light had long since turned green, and he had driven 3 more blocks in the silence that followed his words, and Mr. Theodore had not spoken, and Isaac had not prompted him, because some silences required to be completed before they could be responded to. He watched the old man in the mirror. Mr. Theodore was looking out the window at the passing Accra night, the late-night food sellers, the security guards at compound gates, the occasional figure moving along the pavement with the purposeful walk of someone who had somewhere to be even at this hour. His face was doing several things at once, and Isaac watched it do them without intrusion. He watched the information arrive in layers, the first layer, the factual layer, being received and processed. Then the second layer, the implication layer, which was where the face changed in the way that faces changed when the mind arrived at what a thing meant, rather than just what it was. Then the third layer, which Isaac had seen on Mr. Theodore's face only a handful of times in 11 years, the layer that was simply personal, the face of a man receiving information about someone he loved, someone he had known for 59 years, someone who had sat across from him at their mother's table as a child, and understanding that this person had looked at everything he had built and had decided to burn it. The car reached the airport residential road. Isaac turned into it without being asked, the route requiring no instruction after 11 years, and drove slowly, giving the silence the time it needed. Mr. Theodore spoke when they were 1 street away from the residence. He spoke in a voice that was controlled in the way of a man who has had long practice in receiving difficult things without allowing the difficulty to take over, but that underneath the control had a quality that Isaac had not heard before. Not anger, which he had expected, but something older and less manageable than anger. Something that lived in the territory between grief and disbelief. The specific wound of a betrayal that comes from inside the family, where the defenses have never been built because the defenses were never supposed to be needed. "The watchman," Mr. Theodore said. "Kofi. He has worked that estate for 14 years. "Yes, sir," Isaac said. "The comment about him being managed." "Yes, sir." A pause. "We need to make sure Kofi is safe," Mr. Theodore said. "Not first the property. Not first the insurance fraud, or the brother, or the 40 years of art in the gallery. The watchman." Isaac had known this man for 11 years, and he had just learned something new about him, and it confirmed every assessment he had made. "Yes, sir," Isaac said. He pulled up outside the residence and put the car in park, and turned, slightly, in his seat, not fully around, not presumptuous, but enough to indicate that he was present and available, and that whatever came next, he was not going anywhere. Mr. Theodore sat in the back seat and looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up and met Isaac's eyes in the rearview mirror. "How long have you worked for me, Isaac?" 11 years, sir. In March it will be 12, Mr. Theodore nodded slowly. "In 11 years, he said, you have never brought me anything that was not true." "No, sir." "And you have never brought me anything that was not necessary." "No, sir." The old man looked at him for a moment longer. Then he said, "Come inside. I need to make some calls, and I want you present for them." Isaac turned off the engine. He got out and opened the rear door, and Mr. Theodore stepped out into the airport residential night and stood for a moment looking at the sky the way he always looked at the sky, and then walked toward his front door, and Isaac followed him, which was something that had not happened in 11 years, a driver following his employer into his private residence at midnight, and which felt to Isaac like the crossing of a threshold that had nothing to do with the physical door they were about to walk through. Are you watching this from Accra, London, New York, Nairobi, or somewhere else in this wide world? Drop your location in the comments right now and hit that like button. We are so close to 5,000 subscribers, and every comment, every like, every share keeps these stories alive for the people who need them. Inside, Mr. Theodore went directly to his study. He sat behind his desk and picked up his phone and looked at it for a moment, and then set it down and looked at Isaac, who stood at the appropriate distance inside the study door, his notebook in his hand. "Read me what you wrote," Mr. Theodore said. "Every word." Isaac opened the notebook. He read every word. The study of Mr. Theodore Abrokwa's airport residential home was the room of a man who read seriously and worked seriously, and understood that the two activities were not separate, but were, in the most important sense, the same activity conducted in different registers. The shelves along the left wall held books that had been read. You could tell by the way they sat, slightly irregular, some with markers, some with spines that had been opened many times and had settled into the particular looseness of books that had been lived in rather than displayed. The desk was large and dark and had the ordered density of a working surface, with a lamp that cast a warm, direct light, and a leather blotter that had been replaced recently enough to still be clean and old enough to have a few ink marks at the corner that told the story of a man who thought with a pen in his hand. On the wall behind the desk was a single painting, a large canvas, oil on board, a landscape of the Volta region in the dry season, red earth and pale sky, and a single acacia tree in the middle distance that had the particular quality of things that are alone without being lonely. Isaac had transported that painting from a gallery on Oxford Street 7 years ago, wrapped in cloth in the back of the car, Mr. Theodore holding it on his lap for the last 10 minutes of the journey because he had not been able to wait. He stood now at the door of the study with his notebook in his hand and read every word he had written in the car park of the Polo Club, and Mr. Theodore sat behind his desk and listened with the stillness of a man receiving a document rather than a conversation, his face arranged in the careful neutrality of someone who is storing information for use rather than reacting to it in real time. When Isaac finished, the study was quiet for a moment. Mr. Theodore looked at the blotter on his desk. He picked up his pen and set it down without writing anything. Then he said, "Thursday. That is 6 days." "Yes, sir. The estate is fully staffed through Wednesday. Kofi is on site from Thursday evening." He was thinking aloud, not to Isaac specifically, but in Isaac's presence, which was a form of trust that Isaac received carefully. "The east wing wiring," Mr. Theodore continued. "The maintenance reports. 3 reports over 6 years. They know the documentation." He looked up. "Whoever this second man is, he has done his research. This is not improvised." "No, sir," Isaac said. "It is planned." Mr. Theodore was quiet again. Then he picked up his phone. He dialed a number and waited, and when it was answered said, without preamble, "Edmund, I need you. Tonight, if you can." A pause. "I know the time. I apologize for the time. It cannot wait until morning." He listened. "Thank you." He hung up. He looked at Isaac. "My lawyer is coming. Edmund Quarty. He will be here in 40 minutes. He paused. "Will you stay?" It was asked as a question. A genuine question, not an instruction in the form of a question, which was, Isaac thought, entirely characteristic of the man. "Yes, sir," Isaac said. Mr. Theodore nodded. He stood from the desk and went to the small table against the right wall where a decanter and glasses sat with the domestic readiness of a household that maintained its standards regardless of the hour. He poured 2 glasses of water, not the decanter, the water, and brought one to Isaac and set it on the small table beside the door, within reach, and returned to his desk with the other. The gesture was small. It was a glass of water. It was also a man treating his driver as a person present in a room rather than as a function standing at a door, and Isaac received it without comment and with the full understanding of what it was. They waited. Mr. Theodore worked at his desk, or appeared to work, his pen moving occasionally. But Isaac, watching from the door with the long-trained peripheral awareness of a professional who had spent decades being present without imposing, could see that the work was not fully absorbing him. That part of his mind was somewhere else, and that the somewhere else had a shape that Isaac recognized because he had watched it form across the 40 minutes since the car park. It was the shape of a man processing a betrayal. Not processing in the sense of analyzing. Mr. Theodore was a man of considerable intelligence and had understood the situation completely from Isaac's first telling of it. Processing in the deeper sense, the sense that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with the specific interior work required when someone you love reveals themselves to be other than who you believed them to be. Isaac thought about his own brother, Emmanuel, who lived in Takoradi and with whom he had had a falling out 8 years ago over a land matter. A smaller thing than this, a family plot, a misunderstanding that had calcified into a silence. And he thought about the particular pain of family betrayal, how it was different from all other pain in the way that a wound from your own hand was different from a wound from someone else's, how it carried an additional dimension of confusion because the person who hurt you was also the person you had trusted precisely because of who they were to you. Edmund Quarty arrived at 1:15 in a saloon car that pulled up outside with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been woken and had come anyway, and had decided that if he was coming, he would come completely. He was 64 years old, lean and deliberate in his movements, with the kind of face that had been made more rather than less by the years, sharper, more settled, the face of someone whose intelligence had been tested repeatedly and had come through the testing with its essential quality intact. He greeted Mr. Theodore with the handshake of long professional friendship and then looked at Isaac at the door with the assessing, entirely neutral gaze of a lawyer encountering a witness before he has heard the testimony. "This is Isaac," Mr. Theodore said. "He has been my driver for 11 years. He is the reason you are here tonight." Edmund Quarty looked at Isaac for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me what you heard. Everything, in the order you heard it." Isaac told it a third time. It was no different from the first two tellings because it was true, and true things did not require adjustment across retellings, which was, Edmund Quarty would note later, the first indication that what he was hearing was reliable. When Isaac finished, Edmund sat in the chair across from Mr. Theodore's desk and opened the briefcase he had brought and took out a yellow legal pad and a pen and looked at his notes and then looked at Mr. Theodore. "The insurance policy on the estate," he said. "Who are the named beneficiaries in the event of a claim?" "The company holds the policy," Mr. Theodore said, "as a company asset. The board authorized the policy 7 years ago." "And Clarence is on the board?" "As a non-executive director, yes," Edmund wrote. "If the claim were made and paid, the proceeds would flow to the company?" "To the company, yes. But Clarence has a 17% shareholding. And there are mechanisms." Mr. Theodore paused. He looked at the painting on the wall behind his desk, the Volta landscape, the acacia tree alone in the pale, dry season sky. "There are mechanisms by which a significant liquidity event in the company could be structured to benefit a specific shareholder disproportionately. I designed some of those mechanisms myself years ago for legitimate purposes." Edmund nodded. He wrote, "The second man," he said. "The one with Clarence. Isaac. Describe him again." Isaac described him. Height, build, age estimate, the leather jacket, the restless calculating energy, the specific way he had leaned toward Mr. Clarence when making his points. The phrase "the watchman has been managed" and the particular flatness with which Mr. Clarence had confirmed it. Edmund wrote everything. "The phrase managed," Edmund said, looking at Isaac. "In context, what did you understand it to mean?" Isaac was quiet for a moment. He was not quiet because he was uncertain, but because he was choosing his words with the precision the question deserved. "In context," he said, "it meant that the watchman would not be a problem. It was said the way you say something has been dealt with. Not the way you say someone has been persuaded or paid off. The way you say something has been removed as an obstacle." Edmund looked at him steadily. Then he looked at Mr. Theodore. Something passed between the two older men in that look. A shared understanding of the implication, and a shared decision about what the implication required. "We need to move on 3 fronts simultaneously," Edmund said, his pen already moving on the yellow pad. "First, the watchman. Kofi needs to be off that estate by Thursday evening, and he needs to be told nothing specific that could compromise what follows. A family emergency, a requested day off, something that removes him without alerting anyone that the plan is known." Mr. Theodore nodded. "Second, the insurance company. I know the legal director at Continental Assurance. I will call him first thing tomorrow morning and brief him informally. They will want to know that a fraudulent claim may be incoming, and they will cooperate with what comes next because their exposure is significant." "And third?" Mr. Theodore asked. Edmund set down his pen. He looked at his client across the desk with the direct, undecorated gaze of a lawyer about to say the thing that the situation required and that no one in the room was going to enjoy hearing. "Third," he said, "is Clarence." The study was very quiet. The lamp on the desk cast its warm circle of light, and the painting on the wall held its dry season stillness, and outside the airport residential night continued its quiet, uninvolved business. "Mr. Theodore looked at his lawyer. His face had the expression Isaac had identified in the car. The third layer, the personal layer, the grief that lived underneath the processing. "What do you need from me?" Mr. Theodore said. His voice was entirely steady. It was the steadiness of a man who has made his decision not in this moment, but in the moment in the car when he had asked about the watchman first, which was when Isaac had understood that whatever came next, this man would handle it correctly. "I need you to do nothing," Edmund said. "Nothing visible. Nothing that tells Clarence the plan is known. Can you do that?" Mr. Theodore looked at the painting. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been doing nothing visible with things that hurt me for 68 years. I can manage 6 more days." Edmund picked up his pen. Isaac stood at the study door with his empty water glass and his notebook and felt the particular quality of a moment that would be, he understood, one of the moments he carried for the rest of his life. Not because of what he had done, which was simply what any decent person would have done, but because of what it had revealed about the people in the room with him and about the specific, irreplaceable value of being the kind of person who paid attention and wrote things down and told the truth when the truth needed telling, regardless of his position, regardless of the hierarchy, regardless of everything except the simple, fundamental obligation of one human being to another. The 6 days between that midnight meeting in the airport residential study and the Thursday that Mr. Clarence Abrokwa had chosen for his plan were the longest 6 days of Isaac Boateng Asare's professional life. Not because anything dramatic happened in them, nothing dramatic happened in them, which was precisely what Edmund Quarty had instructed, which was precisely what made them long. Isaac drove Mr. Theodore to his office on Monday morning, and to a site meeting on Tuesday, and to a lunch on Wednesday, and to the estate on Thursday afternoon for what was announced on the household calendar and in the driver's log and in every visible record as a routine inspection visit that Mr. Theodore made periodically and that no one who was watching would have reason to find remarkable. He drove him to all of these places in the black Mercedes and opened doors and waited in car parks and drove back and said good morning and good evening and sir and responded to instructions and conducted himself in every visible particular as the driver he had always been, and underneath this surface conducted himself as a man carrying a significant weight with the care that significant weights required. On Monday evening, he had driven to the estate on the Tresaco Valley Road, alone, at Mr. Theodore's quiet instruction, to speak with Kofi the watchman. Kofi was 62 years old, a thin man with a slow, careful way of moving that suggested a person who had learned the value of economy, of doing what was necessary completely and not doing what was unnecessary at all. He had been the estate's night watchman for 14 years, and he knew the property, the way people knew things they had been alone with in the dark for a long time, intimately, specifically, with the knowledge of someone who had heard every sound the buildings made in every season and could tell the difference between the settling of old wood and something that should not be there. Isaac had told him, at Mr. Theodore's instruction, that there was a family concern that required the estate to be privately secured for the coming week and that Kofi should take Thursday and Friday as paid leave and spend them with his family in Tama, where his daughter lived with her children. He had told him that a security company was being engaged for those 2 days and that Kofi should tell no one he was leaving and should leave by 7 on Thursday evening. Kofi had looked at Isaac with the clear, direct eyes of a man who had been alone in the dark with other people's property for 14 years and who had, over those years, developed an instinct for the shape of situations even when the details were withheld. He had said simply, "Is Mr. Theodore safe?" Isaac had said, "Mr. Theodore is well. This is precautionary." Kofi had looked at him for a moment longer. Then he had said, "I will be in Tema by 6 on Thursday." He had asked nothing further. He had simply trusted, which was the response of a man who had spent 14 years being trusted and understood the transaction. On Tuesday, Edmund Quarty had called the legal director of Continental Assurance, and the legal director had called his own investigators, and by Wednesday afternoon, a quiet, professional surveillance of the estate had been established by people whose names Isaac did not know and whose faces he did not see, but whose presence Edmund confirmed with a text message that said simply, "In place." On Wednesday evening, Isaac had driven Mr. Theodore to the estate for the announced routine inspection, and the old man had walked through every room of the main house and the guest wing and the east wing with the slow, particular attention of a man saying goodbye to things he loved, and also confirming that they were still there to be loved, which was a complicated walk to take, and which Isaac, following at the respectful distance that the occasion required, understood was complicated and said nothing. Mr. Theodore had stood for a long time in the private gallery in the east wing. The gallery was a long room with good lighting and climate control that Mr. Theodore had installed specifically for the collection. 41 pieces, acquired across 30 years, ranging from the small carved wooden figures on the shelves along the left wall to the large canvases that occupied the right wall and the end wall, each one chosen with the specific eye of a man who understood what he was looking at and who cared about what it meant. He had stood in the center of the gallery and looked at it all, and his face had carried the third layer, the personal layer, the grief layer, and Isaac had stood at the gallery door and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the room was not already saying. On the drive back, Mr. Theodore had spoken once. He had said, looking out at the Tresaco Valley Road in the evening light, "My father started with nothing, Isaac, literally nothing. A primary school certificate and a willingness to work longer than everyone else. He built the first business with money he borrowed from 3 separate people and repaid before it was due. He told me once that the most important thing a man could leave his children was not money. It was the knowledge of how money was made, the discipline of it, the patience." He had paused. "I gave Clarence everything I could give him, the position, the shares, the name on the door. I thought I had given him enough." He had said nothing further. Isaac had driven and said nothing and thought about the particular loneliness of a man who has been generous across a lifetime and has discovered that generosity, however genuine, cannot substitute for the internal work that the other person has to do themselves. Thursday came. Isaac arrived at the airport residential residence at 7 in the morning, as always. Mr. Theodore was already dressed and at his desk, which was not unusual, and there were 2 other men in the study who were not Edmund Quarty, younger, with the compact, alert quality of men whose professional competence was physical rather than documentary. Isaac recognized the type from construction sites, security, the real kind, not the kind in uniforms at shopping mall entrances. He was introduced to neither of them, which he understood was correct and appropriate, and which told him that the plan for the evening had been constructed at a level of professional detail that did not require his knowledge of its components in order for his part to be performed. His part, Mr. Theodore told him, was to drive him to the estate at 4 in the afternoon and to remain in the car in the compound for the duration of the evening. He was not to leave the car. He was not to approach the house. If he was asked by anyone why they were there, he was to say it was a routine owner visit and that Mr. Theodore had decided to spend the night at the estate, which was true. Mr. Theodore had packed a bag. They arrived at the estate at 4:20. The afternoon light was slanted and golden over the gardens, and the main house sat in it with the particular solidity of a well-built thing that had been standing in its place long enough to look as though it had grown there rather than been constructed. Isaac parked in the compound and turned off the engine and put his seat back 2 notches and prepared himself with the patience of 31 professional years to wait. Mr. Theodore went inside. The 2 men from the study, who had arrived separately in a separate car that was now parked outside the estate's rear entrance, were somewhere on the property in positions Isaac did not know and did not need to know. Edmund Quarty was at his office, available by phone. The Continental Assurance investigators were in position. Kofi was in Tema with his daughter's children. The estate was quiet. The gardens were beautiful in the late afternoon light. Isaac sat in the Mercedes and looked at the main house and thought about the painting on the wall of Mr. Theodore's study, the acacia tree alone in the dry season sky, alone without being lonely, and thought about what it meant to guard something, to be the person who stayed present when presence was what the situation required, not because you were the most powerful person available, but because you were the person who had happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right quality of attention. At 8:47, a car came through the estate's side entrance. It was not a car Isaac recognized. It stopped near the east wing. 2 men got out. Isaac did not move. He noted the time in his notebook. He noted the car, make, color, partial plate. He noted the 2 figures moving toward the east wing in the thickening dark, one of them carrying something he could not identify at this distance, the other moving with the particular purposeful quiet of someone who believed they were unobserved. At 8:51, the estate's exterior floodlights came on at full power simultaneously, illuminating every corner of the compound with the flat, unsparing brightness of lights that had been set to a timer that was not their usual timer, and in that sudden, complete illumination, the 2 men near the east wing stopped and stood exposed and blinking in the light like men who had been moving in the confidence of darkness and had just discovered that the darkness had been an arrangement rather than a condition. At 8:52, a voice that was not Isaac's and was not Mr. Theodore's and was not anyone's that Isaac recognized called out from the direction of the rear garden in the clear, carrying voice of professional authority, clearly and without ambiguity, instructing the 2 men to remain where they were and to put down what they were carrying. At 8:53, the thing that the second man had been carrying, a metal container, its purpose unmistakable in the floodlight, was set down on the estate's red earth compound floor, and the 2 men were on their knees with their hands visible, and the evening, which had been prepared for this moment for 6 days, arrived at the moment it had been prepared for. Isaac sat in the Mercedes with his notebook open on his knee and wrote the time. He wrote what he had seen. He wrote it all down, every detail, in the careful handwriting of a man who understood that the record was as important as the event, that truth required witnesses, and witnesses required records, and records required the specific discipline of a person who wrote things down before they could soften. From inside the main house, he heard footsteps on the veranda, and then Mr. Theodore appeared in the floodlit compound, moving toward the east wing with a steadiness that Isaac recognized. Not the steadiness of a man who felt nothing, but the steadiness of a man who had decided what he felt and had placed it where it needed to be placed so that he could do what needed to be done. He walked past the Mercedes without stopping. Then he stopped. He turned. He looked at Isaac through the windscreen. Isaac looked back at him. Mr. Theodore said nothing. He simply looked at his driver for a moment in the full light of the floodlit compound and then turned and walked on toward the east wing and toward the 2 men on their knees and toward whatever the next part of this evening required of him. Isaac watched him go and felt in the watching the particular quality of a moment that had been worth everything it had cost to arrive at. The early morning, the notebook, the 6 days of surface normalcy over interior alertness, the glass of water on the table by the study door, all of it arriving here, in this compound, in this light, with a man's life's work still standing because someone had been paying attention. The 2 men on their knees in the floodlit compound of the Tresaco Valley estate were not, as it turned out, men of particular conviction. They were men of hire, men who had been engaged for a specific task at a specific price, and who, in the full, merciless illumination of the estate's exterior lights, with professional security personnel standing over them, and the metal container of accelerant sitting on the red earth beside them as evidence that required no interpretation, made the calculation that men of hire make in such moments, and began, with considerable speed, to provide the names and details that the situation made it advantageous to provide. Isaac did not hear the specifics of what they said. He was in the Mercedes, in the compound, as Mr. Theodore had instructed, his notebook open, his pen moving, recording what he could observe from his position. The time, the movements of the people in the compound, the arrival of 2 additional vehicles at 9:15 that had the look of official vehicles, which confirmed that Edmund Quarty had made calls that evening beyond the Continental Assurance legal director. He recorded all of it with the same even, deliberate handwriting that he had used in the car park of the Polo Club 6 days ago, because the record was the record, and the record required consistency regardless of what was happening around it. At 9:45, Mr. Theodore came back to the Mercedes. He opened the rear door himself, which he rarely did, and sat in the back seat and pulled the door closed, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the car with his hands on his knees and looked straight ahead at the floodlit compound through the windscreen. Isaac sat in the front seat and did not speak and did not turn around, and gave the old man the silence that the moment required. After perhaps 2 minutes, Mr. Theodore said, "Clarence was not here tonight." "No, sir," Isaac said. "He sent others to do what he would not do himself," Mr. Theodore said. It was said without surprise. It was the statement of a man confirming something he had already understood. But underneath the absence of surprise was something that Isaac heard clearly, the particular weight of a man acknowledging that the person he had known for 59 years had not only planned this thing, but had been too careful or too cowardly to be physically present for it. "Edmund says they will have Clarence by morning," Mr. Theodore said. The men gave a full account. Meetings, payments, instructions, everything. He paused. "Clarence used his own phone for some of the communications. Edmund says that was the foolishness he mentioned." Isaac thought of Edmund Quarty in his study the night of the midnight meeting. "In my experience, they are usually both bold and foolish." He said nothing. Mr. Theodore was quiet again. Then he said, in a voice that had come down from the controlled register into something more private, "I keep thinking about the gallery. He knew what was in the gallery, Isaac. He has been in that room 100 times. He knows what those pieces mean. And he chose the east wing." Isaac looked at the estate's main house through the windscreen, the lights in its windows, the gallery's climate-controlled wing extending along the right side of the building, solid and intact in the floodlit night. He thought about Mr. Theodore standing in that gallery on Wednesday evening with the 3rd layer on his face. He thought about 41 pieces collected across 30 years. He thought about the carved wooden figures on the left wall and the large canvas on the end wall that Isaac had always looked at when he was in the gallery on an errand. A painting of the coast near Elmina, the sea the color of old pewter, a fishing boat at the edge of the frame that seemed to be either arriving or departing. The ambiguity of it being, Isaac had always thought, the whole point. All of it still there, still standing. Because a driver had been paying attention in a car park on a Wednesday night and had written things down before they could soften. He did not say any of this. He simply said, "The gallery is safe, sir." Mr. Theodore looked at the back of Isaac's head for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it is." They sat in the compound for another hour while the official business concluded around them. Statements taken, evidence photographed and catalogued, vehicles moving in and out of the estate gate with the procedural efficiency of institutions doing their work. At 11:15, Edmund Quarty arrived in his saloon car and went inside with the 2 official-looking men and did not come out for 40 minutes. When he came out, he came to the Mercedes and knocked on Isaac's window, and Isaac lowered it, and Edmund looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze that he had used on the night they first met in the study, and said simply, "Your notebook, every page from that night. I need certified copies for the record." Isaac handed him the notebook. Edmund took it with both hands. He looked at it for a moment. The small, worn thing, its cover slightly bent from living in a glove compartment, its pages filled with the careful handwriting of a man who had been doing his job faithfully for 31 years. And something moved through Edmund's face that was not quite a professional expression and not quite a personal one, but was the thing that happened when a lawyer of 47 years encountered evidence that was exactly what evidence was supposed to be. "I will return it tomorrow," he said. "With the copies." He went back inside. Clarence Abrocwa was taken into custody the following morning at 6:15 at his East Legon residence. Isaac was not there for this. He was at the airport residential house, in the compound, waiting, which was what he did every morning. He learned of it from Mr. Theodore, who came out to the car at 7:30, not to be driven anywhere but simply to stand in the morning compound for a moment, which he did sometimes when something had happened that required the outdoors rather than the indoors. He stood beside the Mercedes and looked at the morning sky and told Isaac that Edmund had called at 6:45 with the confirmation, and that Clarence had been cooperative in the way of a man who understood that the evidence against him made the alternative to cooperation a worse outcome than cooperation itself. He said it all looking at the sky, and Isaac stood beside the car door, which he had opened out of habit, and listened and looked at the same sky. Then Mr. Theodore said, "I would like to go to the estate today. I want to spend the day there." "Yes, sir," Isaac said. "And Isaac?" "Sir." "Bring your wife." Isaac looked at him. Mr. Theodore was looking at the sky still, his hands clasped behind his back, in the posture he used when he was standing still and thinking, and did not want to appear to be doing either. "Bring Abena. There is a garden at the estate that no one uses properly, and my housekeeper will make lunch, and I think it would be a good day for people who deserve a good day to have one." Isaac looked at this man, 68 years old, the night before barely behind him, his brother in custody, the weight of all of it sitting on him in the particular way that family weights sat, differently from all other weights, and felt the specific quality of gratitude that arrived not when someone did something large for you, but when someone saw you, when someone registered that you were a person in full rather than a function in position and acted accordingly. He called Abena from the compound. She arrived at 9 in her good dress because she was Abena, and she always wore her good dress for occasions she respected. And she greeted Mr. Theodore with both hands and the slight courtesy that her generation offered to elders, and Mr. Theodore received it with the warmth of a man who had remembered, in the middle of a difficult week, that there was goodness available if you looked for it in the right places. They drove to the estate on the Tresaco Valley Road in the morning light, the three of them, Mr. Theodore in the back and Abena beside Isaac in the front, because Mr. Theodore had insisted, which was not how things were usually done, and which was therefore exactly right for today. The estate was quiet and intact in the morning sun. The gardens were as Joseph, the estate's gardener, a young man from Koforidua who had been tending the grounds for 3 years, had left them the previous afternoon, before the evening's events had altered the compound's history. The roses along the eastern wall were open. The mango trees along the back stood in their patient, productive authority. And the gallery in the east wing held its 41 pieces in their climate-controlled stillness, each one exactly where it had been placed, each one unchanged, the coast near Elmina still showing its pewter sea and its ambiguous boat, still arriving or departing, the ambiguity still the whole point. Mr. Theodore walked Isaac and Abena through the gallery. He walked them through it slowly, stopping at each piece, telling the story of where it had come from and when and why he had chosen it. And Isaac listened to these stories and understood that he was being given something, not just information about paintings, but access to the interior of a man's life, the specific things a man had loved and chosen and protected, which was a form of trust that had no professional category and required no job title to receive. After the gallery, they sat in the garden, and the housekeeper brought food, rice and stew and fried plantain and cold drinks, and they ate in the late morning shade of the estate's largest mango tree, the three of them, a tycoon and a driver's wife, eating together in a garden that had nearly been ash and was instead still a garden, which was perhaps the most important thing it could be. Abena, who was not a woman to leave significant things unsaid, looked at Mr. Theodore across the food and said, "My husband has worked for you for 11 years, and he has never once come home from work and spoken badly of you. In 11 years. That is not common." Mr. Theodore looked at her. Then he looked at Isaac. "It is not common on my side either," he said. After lunch, Isaac sat alone for a moment at the edge of the garden, while Abena walked with the housekeeper and Mr. Theodore took his afternoon phone calls on the terrace. He sat in the garden of the estate that was still standing and looked at the eastern wall where the roses were, and thought about the night in the car park and the notebook in the glove compartment, and the glass of water on the table by the study door, and all the small, specific things that had added up to this afternoon in this garden. He thought about his father, who had polished his shoes every morning and had told him that a man who respected his shoes respected himself, which was not really about shoes at all. He thought about 31 years of professional life conducted with the faithful, unhurried attention of someone who understood that how you did the small things was who you were when the large things arrived. He thought about Kofi and Tema, with his daughter's children, safe and unknowing and alive. And he thought about the thing the elders said, that God puts the right person in the right place at the right time, and the only question was whether that person was awake enough to know it when it happened. He had been awake. That was all. That was everything. If this story has moved you, if it has reminded you that ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary faithfulness are the ones who hold the world together, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel and hit that like button and help us reach 5,000 subscribers, because every story we tell exists because you are here to receive it. Are you watching from Accra, Lagos, London, Toronto, Johannesburg, or somewhere else in this beautiful world? Drop your country in the comments below, because your presence here is what makes this community real. As the elders have always said, the man who drives carefully arrives safely, and the man who pays attention saves more than he knows.